Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Machine Dreams, where we sit down with the founders, engineers, operators, and stakeholders shaping AI in the real world. My name is Kolawole Samuel Adebayo. I'm a technology analyst and Forbes columnist. And as always, I'm joined by my remarkable co-host.
Hi, Sam. I'm Leah Stern, Global Communications Strategist and Venture Capitalist. I have to say, I don't think we meant to both be wearing animal print. And I have to say,
Absolutely.
a certain man to be able to pull it off, and that man's you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely stunning. So,
Today, we're talking about two technologies that scare people for the wrong reasons, cryptocurrency and AI. Both get blamed when criminals misuse them. Both are misunderstood by the public, and both are about to collide in ways that will reshape finance, privacy, and digital trust. We're joined by Katherine Kirkpatrick Bos, General Counsel at StarkWare, a company building zero-knowledge cryptography for blockchain infrastructure. Katherine has been keeping a close eye on this Nancy Guthrie case that has taken over the U.S. and the world. And we are looking at why blaming Bitcoin misses the point in this horrific case. Katherine, thank you for joining us on Machine Dreams.
Thank you so much for having me. And I apologize that I too didn't show up in leopard print.
Yes, you did not get the memo. But you're a leopard in your own right, I'll have to say.
Absolutely.
So, Katherine, in this Nancy Guthrie kidnapping case, which has just been so horrific and blown everyone away in the U.S., investigators are saying the perpetrators demanded millions in Bitcoin. Almost immediately, crypto was framed as the villain. You've written in some recent op-ed pieces, and you've been very vocal about this, that criminals use Bitcoin for the same reasons ordinary people do. What do you mean by that?
So that's the beauty of crypto is when you think about transporting a huge bag of cash, there are logistical issues with that. Crypto is faster. It's built for a global ecosystem, a global world, a cross-border world. Its transmission is instantaneous. So all of those facets are what helps, an average worker easily and affordably send money home. But it also helps a criminal quickly and easily transmit crypto versus, fiat cash, which is physically difficult to transport.
Absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. I think one of the things that I've been curious about is there seems to be some people say that Bitcoin is anonymous and, some other would say it's pseudonymous, right? So could you explain the difference and why it actually matters, for catching criminals?
It's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it because there's so much confusion around this. So crypto is entirely traceable and visible on chain. Anyone with internet access can actually see a blockchain, and Bitcoin is a crypto asset, but it's also a blockchain, a digital ledger online. So anyone can see transfers or transmission of Bitcoin on chain with internet access. That means it is totally transparent to trace the flows of the transmission of crypto. The pseudo-anonymity arises because those transfers or the crypto wallets that are sending the transfers are not tied to any one individual or entity. There's not a name associated with them. So it gets a reputation as being perfect for criminals because it's easy to hide. And that's actually not entirely correct. It's somewhat easy to hide the identity of someone behind the crypto transfer, but the transfers and moves of the crypto asset themselves are entirely transparent on chain.
And you're involved in advising U.S. governments on how to move forward legislation and also very vocal about changing the narrative in the U.S. on how people think about cryptocurrency. What, besides for its use by criminals, what are other misconceptions people have? And how are people actually really using it in their day-to-day life?
There's so many absolutely fantastic use cases. I mean, obviously, people think when they think crypto, financial crypto. And there's something to be said about that in that a lot of what crypto does, when you compare it to our current system, for example, in traditional markets, it's faster, it's cheaper. A lot of decentralized finance, for example, removes unnecessary and expensive intermediaries that ultimately pass on costs to average individuals. But crypto is also really important for, again, improving the lives of everyday individuals. A very commonly discussed crypto asset are stable coins, which are crypto assets that are pegged to a fiat currency like the US dollar. And average individuals have the ability to send stable coins immediately, cheaply. Compare that to having to send a wire where you pay $25 to send a wire domestically in the United States and have to wait 3 days. Another huge use case, of course, and I always remind people that most, if not all other types of currencies are pegged ultimately to a centralized government. And one of my favorite anecdotes is when I was in the private sector, I worked on a case involving the Black Swan event tied to the Swiss franc. And this was back in 2014. The Swiss said, we're not going to pull the peg on the Swiss franc. We're not going to pull the peg. The next day they pulled the peg, causing a Black Swan event in the FX, the foreign exchange markets, and immediately erasing 30% of value for the Swiss franc. Think about being an average person in Switzerland who has worked for years to gain 30% equity in their home. And all of that is undone overnight by a group of individuals sitting in a room and making this decision. Obviously, there is conceptual appeal to a store of value where no one entity or small group of individuals has the power to do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, AI is the noise these days, and it's hard to have a conversation with anyone across any industry without hearing the words AI or machine intelligence or machine learning. And a lot of companies, big blockchain companies, crypto companies like Chainalysis and Elliptic are using machine learning to trace crypto transactions across wallets and exchanges. So I'm curious to know, what is this interplay between, blockchain and AI? Is AI going to help to accelerate blockchain analysis? Going to help companies trace transactions better? What does it look like right now, and what does the future portend?
Yes. And it's interesting. A lot of people don't understand what blockchain analytics is at all. And this is a widespread term for inspecting, visualizing data, identifying data on chain, on the distributed ledger, to trace transactions and to kind of figure out patterns in the data. And a lot of these big blockchain analytics companies, you mentioned Chainalysis, Elliptic, TRM, there's a slew of other companies that have all formed with the thesis of using blockchain analytics to effectively make on-chain engagement safer. And they use things like transaction pattern recognition, not only to suss out criminal activity or high-risk activity on-chain, but also to work with law enforcement in tracing the flow of dirty money. And they definitely use AI. And probably the most common use is transaction pattern recognition. So machine learning models, as you mentioned, are trained to ID certain clusters of addresses that likely belong to the same entity or the same individual. So this technique is called clustering. And AI really improves on the basic rule-based heuristics by spotting like kind of subtle behavior that a human might not pick up on. And I will just finally say that the beauty of crypto and people in crypto is they're comfortable with emerging technology. They're comfortable with things that might make other people uncomfortable. So I often think of crypto and AI as cousins. We're both dealing with an ever-changing regulatory environment. We're both dealing with absolute game-changing technology that is very scary to people.
And with that, let's talk about institutional adoption and privacy infrastructure. Recently, we've seen major institutional movement, private blockchain payments on public rails. Yesterday, if you could tell us about this announcement that your firm made regarding EY's involvement. Wall Street is experimenting with tokenized treasuries and funds, but institutions don't want such strategies visible to competitors. Is privacy the missing layer for institutional adoption?
It's a great point. And it is a big part of what needs to happen to get to the next phase of institutional engagement with crypto. What we're seeing right now that's prompting a lot of this discussion is there has been so much talk about stablecoins, payments, and tokenization in the context of crypto and institutional engagement. And tokenization is obviously the act of taking an asset, and it can be, for example, a stock, a house, and creating a token on chain that represents that asset. And of course, conceptually, you can understand why that would be appealing. It's much easier to trade a token on chain than it is to trade, for example, a gold bar or a stock certificate or a house. And the problem, however, is one day, if everything is tokenized, as many have predicted it will be at one point, as we just discussed, everything is transparent on chain. So that brings a real problem for participants like hedge funds, asset managers that have proprietary trading strategies. They don't want their competitors to see what they're doing with their assets, what they're shorting. So privacy on chain is going to be absolutely necessary to get institutions fully on board to protect their competitive strategies.
The EY announcement that StarkWare made, can you tell us a bit about that?
So this is really, really exciting. One of the reasons I joined StarkWare is filled with really the original geniuses behind zero knowledge proof technology, which is known for privacy technology and blockchain scaling, importantly. And so we've been working on privacy for a while. And EY built basically what is called Nightfall, which is privacy on chain. You know, it sits on top of a blockchain and creates institutional friendly privacy because there's actually a mechanism to KYC the participants that want to, and I should say, now I'm slipping into lawyer talk, to perform know your client analysis to make sure bad guys aren't using this privacy solution. Know your client KYC used for anti-money laundering. And so the fact that StarkWare has integrated this and has engaged in this partnership with EY, which is obviously a huge name globally, is definitely indicative of the fact that the market wants this. And this is the next stage of, institutional engagement and innovation to get entities on chain.
Katherine, thank you. Let's talk a little more about StarkWare. The co-founders, the founders rather, co-developed zero knowledge proof systems. For people who are in cryptographers or who don't have so much crypto or blockchain knowledge, what does that mean and what problem does it actually solve?
Yes. So it's definitely a great point because sometimes I get so in my StarkWare bubble. I often joke that I'm the stupidest person at StarkWare. We often forget that a lot of the concepts that we're working with are not mainstream as of yet, or they're operating under the hood. And a great example of that is zero knowledge proof technology. And it is usually associated with privacy and for very good reason. But this technology was used and in part developed by StarkWare to actually first improve the scalability and performance and speed of blockchains. So this is cryptography-based technology, effectively very complicated math that bundles computations off-chain. They can do that faster and cheaper and moves them on-chain. And what's super exciting about this is some of these zero knowledge proofs, ZK Starks in particular, are actually quantum resistant. So this is very sophisticated technology that can be used in a myriad of ways.
And you recently brought on one of the kings of quantum, Scott Aronson, as a new member of StarkWare. Tell me about this new kind of crossover between crypto and quantum and what's the future in that realm?
So there's been a lot of what I would almost deem hysteria within not only crypto, but the traditional investing population as to the quantum threat to Bitcoin. And the fear is, of course, that quantum computing can effectively break Bitcoin. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but I won't go into depth for your listeners. Now, my CEO, who is one of the smartest minds in all of cryptography, so I certainly trust him on this, is very sage about this threat. I mean, in addition to the fact that ZK Starks are quantum resistant, the technology that is being developed in crypto, in part with the assistance of agentic activity, is advancing extremely fast to face and overcome this quantum threat. So I love that StarkWare is really blazing the trail in developing this technology, bringing on the best and brightest minds to pair with us to ensure that not only StarkWare, but crypto as a whole is addressing this new technology.
Great. Catherine, there's a question that I've always had, and I've asked a number of people. I've asked it online, I've asked it on my Twitter, and I've asked it on Facebook. It's away from, the AI or cryptography or quantum conversation. I'm just really curious about it. And I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but what really happened to NFTs?
Great question. So, there's pockets of crypto and it's a giant ecosystem. There's NFTs, there's decentralized finance, there's meme coins, there's Bitcoins. There's so many aspects to crypto beyond what people think when they think crypto. And actually, that's one of the things that makes it particularly difficult to legislate. And it's also particularly interesting because a lot of times the crypto market participants, the big issue we had with the US regulators putting everything into the securities bucket was there are things like NFTs, which at their core were really collectibles. And what happens with collectibles? Well, people decide they don't want them anymore. And I think we saw that to a great degree with NFTs. There was obviously a craze. There are still obviously people and participants that are interested in NFTs for the purposes of collectability. There's also use cases for NFTs beyond collectability. For example, there's some interesting developments using NFTs for identification purposes. But there are, peaks and valleys in crypto. There are areas that people are going to be obsessed with, and then they're going to move on. Right now, we're seeing that, for example, with prediction markets. It's all anyone can talk about.
So for the viewers that have never dabbled in this world, that's now, I think, coming out from the basements and the underground, and we're trying to make it more approachable and mainstream. How does someone get started?
That's a great question. So I think you want to learn as much as you possibly can about how this technology works. It's extremely intimidating to people because it uses an entirely different language, an entirely different vernacular. And I always find this amusing because I spent years in traditional finance, and there are really intelligent C-suite individuals that say things like, "Oh, I don't understand that crypto stuff. I'm not smart enough. It's too confusing for me." And I think it's ridiculous. I'm like, you work in derivatives. If you can understand derivatives, you can understand DeFi. It's not that complicated. It just uses a different terminology, which is highly intimidating to people. So I think the first step I would recommend is start learning. I actually started learning about crypto years and years ago when I decided to start listening to crypto podcasts while on my runs. And I had read an article that piqued my interest, and I started listening to podcasts, and I picked up the language. And the more I learned, the more intrigued and excited I was, the more I realized conceptually how this could change, for example, the financial markets. I was working entirely for traditional financial services clients at the time. I saw some of the dysfunction and inefficiency. And once you learn the concepts and get more comfortable, I would suggest you engage on an experimental basis. Now, this is not investment advice, but I always say, don't trade crypto in an amount that you can't afford to lose, especially if you're not a professional trader. But go out and experiment with decentralized finance protocols, buy an NFT for fun, engage with a crypto wallet. That's how you learn.
Great. My final question, Catherine, one of the challenges that I've seen banks have, especially when it comes to using AI on customer data, is because it's a very heavily regulated space, they can't share that data. So I want to come back to the concept of zero knowledge proofs, which you've done a great job explaining the other time. Do you think that zero knowledge proofs could, solve this problem and let AI models train on encrypted financial data without ever seeing the raw information?
Absolutely. That's what's so exciting about ZK technology. And I'm glad you brought this up because I realized I didn't actually explain the value. And so ZK proofs are basically incredibly complicated mathematics, but on a high level, there's a prover and a verifier, and the verifier issues random challenges based on a mathematical problem created by cryptographic hash functions, kind of like math algorithms. And if the prover knows the secret, the questions are answered correctly. Why does that matter? Why do we care? It means you can verify something without having to reveal or provide the underlying data. So we're looking at a situation where every day in your example, you're having to supply your passport to a bank. You're having to supply your address to order something online where they're not shipping it to your home. You're having to, provide your birth date and a whole slew of personally identifiable information as a matter of course every single day in a multitude of different scenarios. And by the way, that data is being hacked all the time. Every day there's a data breach. Every day people are dealing with identity theft because of this lack of selective disclosure. So what does ZK technology do? And this is why, by the way, it's being used not just in crypto, but in consumer-facing apps. It minimizes the provision of that data for everyday use. So when you look at the traditional financial services context, banks have to request this data. In the United States, they have to adhere to the Bank Secrecy Act. So they have to fulfill certain minimum requirements for know your client procedures. But we're getting to the point where we are engaging with regulators and making them aware and educating them about this technology, which could achieve the same purpose, but provide a better mechanism for what's called selective disclosure. We don't have to provide all this data when a more minimal amount of data is required and would then need to be stored and potentially hacked. And we're getting there. I mean, I was very heartened by the fact, I sat on the Securities and Exchange Commission roundtable about privacy and financial surveillance. So the fact that we had regulators and we had people from not just the US SEC, but also the Treasury Department and others in the room for this conversation, the fact that those conversations are happening is the first step forward to seeing a better process in banks and everywhere.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for such a great, insightful, honest, wonderful conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Next time, I'll show up in my leopard print.
We would love that.
I'll be on the lookout for that.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Machine Drains, where we talk about the technology shaping our future, from AI to the infrastructure that will support it. See you next time.